Look out! It's just two mediocre white dudes on film.
You caught me off guard with that. I appreciate the reference, Mr. PJ Campbell, or should I say Mr. Brett Goldstein Campbell? I don't know what we're doing there, but
you know what? That was actually a decent impression for someone who is just having his coffee first thing in the morning.
I will admit that was actually a very, very good impression. If you guys don't understand that impression out there, obviously you have not ever heard Brett Goldstein Buried with Film. Buried with Film? Is it Buried with Film?
Films to be buried
Films
with.
to be buried with.
A podcast I've been stumping for weeks on. Like, here's us doing our podcast, and I keep being like, that's great. Go listen to this podcast over here because Brett Goldstein's really talented comparatively to us.
Hey, PJ turned me on to that podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I have been doing a deep dive and grabbing a bunch of different ones.
It's so wonderful.
So much fun. His one with Edgar Wright was great. I got Felicia Day I'm listening to now. I want to listen to James Wan and Lee Winnell just was a recent one. I'm listening to that one soon. Yeah, it's just a fun podcast to listen to. If you like
the Daisy Ridley episode is really good.
Yes, yeah,
that one was really good too. The Bill Lawrence episode I've trumpeted before, and of course, like for you and I, the Kevin Smith one is like it's just a fever dream the entire time. It's amazing.
As only Kevin can make anything he does, generally speaking.
I mean, you're kind of not wrong, actually.
Kevin just takes everything and makes it Kevin. And we love him for it. If you love Kevin, you know what you're getting into. And if you don't, well,
maybe, I mean, look, it is what it is at that point.
Absolutely. 100%.
Is it just me, or has this been the longest January of all time, by the way?
It has been so long. I mean, I shouldn't complain because I feel like 2024 went by in like a quick bat of the eye, but I feel like all of 2024 has fit into this January.
It's so wild, man. Like, I keep waiting for it to be over. Yeah, like, it was my birthday month, and I'm not even like, it's not even that. It just feels like it is never ending, and I am so tired. Like, I really want it to be next month already. Maybe it's because I want to see Harrison Ford as Red Hulk. I really don't know. But, like, that's a whole thing, which, by the way, patrons, buckle up. You're getting a special prize soon.
You are indeed. We should actually just announce that now.
That's why I was doing it. I was fucking teeing you up, man. It's your channel. All right, cool. All right. Well, I guess we share it.
Patreon.com/PLD Projects. We do have a great crew there already. People like Austin Goodell, Will, Brendan Buckingham, wonderful people. Got a Facebook group there. We do early access to stuff. Sometimes we do. I know my Queen podcast gets up there every week, so I always record that early. So that always gets up early. Try to do extra content. Now PJ and I have decided to come up with some even bonus content for you guys. Very, very early access. We're going to call it.
Very, very indeed.
Are going to start a Two Mediocre White Dudes series on the MCU, the entirety of the MCU. We talked about doing it on the show proper before, and we couldn't make it a full season because that's like, we do we only go every other week. That's like a year and a half of scheduling right there, right?
So you're going to get a year and a half of scheduling, motherfuckers.
We will. We're just going to break it up into different phases here and there. And you're going to get it on Patreon a lot sooner than you are in the proper channel. You will get them eventually in the proper channel. We're not going to hide it from you guys. But what we're going to do is we're going to record them kind of like in between other episodes. And as soon as we're done recording them, they're going to go on Patreon probably that night or like soon thereafter. And when we build up enough of those episodes, maybe once a month, we're not going to be able to do it. Like I said, they're bonus episodes really at this point. Once a month, we'll do it through. When we get like through a phase, then we'll start doling them out onto the main channel as well. Maybe to give us a break at some point potentially, or even to give this channel some bonus content or something to that effect.
It's just about making sure you guys get more of us. And like, the truth of the matter is like, we love doing scary movies. Here we are. I mean, shocker that the podcast that started about scary movies likes doing scary movies. I can't believe it.
Can't believe it.
But we just knew that there was more we wanted to do. And so there's a little bit of that type of stuff going on. And so the MCU kind of offers us a chance to dive into a lot of other material. And you guys deserve, if you're on the Patreon, we want to give you some stuff early. Like very similarly, if you get the Patreon for Films to be Buried with, you get like 15 to 20 minutes extra podcast material.
Right.
So here's us trying to make, give you guys something extra. Again, the podcast episodes will eventually drop to the patron or the non-patrons, but the patrons should have something more fun than just hearing me yell at people in our group chat for being special and trying to poke the bear. Stop poking the bear, aka.
Been a lot of people you could poke the bear. That's true.
Yeah, just not me. Like, you can poke any bear, just don't poke at me because I get prickly. I don't know if you know this about me. I get prickly.
Yes, you absolutely do, and it's okay. That's why I love you for it. I give you a big
Jeff
old hug when you
Holtzman,
get
I'm looking at you.
Fair. Good point. Good point. Yeah, so I think you can probably expect our first episode to drop probably in March. I'm going to say we're going to do it sometime during February, but probably towards the end of February because I do have a week off. I'm leaving, and scheduling is kind of a
He's
little
going
bit of a
on
nightmare.
vacation. What's that like? Must be
I know,
nice.
It's amazing. So by the end of the month, we'll record our first one. We'll be starting obviously with Iron Man 2008, and we'll go from there. And so I would suspect the end of February, early March, we get your first episode on Patreon. When it's going to drop on the main channel, I don't really know yet. It kind of depends on how quickly it takes us to get through it. But I would
probably won't be till the back end of summer, honestly, if that, even
August,
early fall. Because
yeah.
we were kind of talking about it off mic, and I'll be completely honest with you. Like, we also want to bank them so that as we start putting them out, you guys get more.
Yeah.
So, bear with us. And if you're on the Patreon, you're going to get extra cool stuff. And I love that for you guys.
Yeah. And I'll try to definitely keep you up to date as far as when things are going to drop. Like when we know when they're going to drop, and I'll let you, here it is, the studio debut. Boom. There you go. So, and plus MCU, after you get through the entirety of MCU, I think we'll probably try to keep that going in different ways. We'll take another franchise that's maybe a long
Star Wars
franchise, maybe do a Star Wars thing that way. Absolutely. Maybe even do Puppet Master. Probably not.
No. I've given up on Puppet Master being on here, and maybe for the better for everyone involved. Although I might still poke at you about trying to, but maybe not. I don't know.
I still will
dream.
throw it out there. I think we can do like the first one in a grouping of like one-off horror films from that time period or something like that. I don't know exactly. Maybe we'll do. I was gonna say maybe we could do something with doll-related horror, but I mean, we already have Annabelle already gone. Child's Play.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, although you know what, it would be really fun to eventually do the Child's Play franchise. But here's the thing, and it's kind of what we've talked about with the MCU also. It gets a little tricky because Child's Play has moved to television and is now moving back to movies. But the problem is that the movie is clearly going to like pick up after the events of the show.
Right.
And you kind of get into weird water because we just do television or do movies.
Right.
Like, we do Doctor Who, but that is specifically its own thing, not on this part of the show.
Right.
Unless I'm talking about Doctor Who, in which case, different thing entirely. But like, now with the bleeding of those lines, it becomes, do we actually cover that? Like, you know what I mean? And we've talked about that because, like, with the MCU, WandaVision, Loki, She-Hulk, Daredevil, like, there are other things, but you're also now asking us to watch a whole lot of television.
Right. I could see us, and this is me almost just talking to PJ on air, discussing our back.
Never.
Stuff. We do it sometimes. I think the potential we actually could do the shows since we're doing them kind of like lazily, not lazily. We're doing them more like kind of relaxed, scheduling wise. We could actually go. You know what? Yeah, we'll cover the shows on Patreon, and maybe I'll edit that together. We could just do like a episode on the series kind of thing.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking would be just one episode that kind of covers the whole
this is
season.
The 6 episodes we watched, and this is what we liked and didn't, and we'll cover the season because, quite frankly, let's be honest, most of these TV series they do on Disney Plus for Marvel and for Star Wars, for that matter, are not really even TV series. They're mostly just one long movie that are cut up into 6 episodes, 6 hours.
That's part of the problem most of the time.
Don't disagree.
I know you don't. I've made my feelings very known about I love Obi-Wan. I do. But it should have been like a 2.5-hour movie.
Absolutely, 100%. The original way that it's pitched would have been a much. I love the Obi-Wan series. I had a lot of fun with it.
I did too.
I am someone who loved the character of Reva. Thought she was quite cool. I would like to have seen Reva in a different avenue, like her own thing. And
I hope we do see Reva again.
I do too. I think she's a cool character. I think there's a lot you could tell with her. I just think we could have had the tight 2.5-hour or 2-hour Obi-Wan movie. Maybe a Reva series of her own kind of thing in a way. It would have been a cool storyline on its own. But I digress. We're getting into that kind of thing. But so it's not best for content, but it is best for our content in a way. It works for our content doing one episode on the entire series. But we'll get there for sure. Absolutely. And that's the way we can talk to the patrons too, see what longer term shows they would maybe want to see us cover. I mean, I don't guarantee anything, but if we pitch something that we go, hey, why not? You never know. We're open to suggestions for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of comes down to also, like, clearly the stuff that we talk about has heavy like mythology or lore or things like that. And when you start getting into doing this stuff, like I want to make sure that there's always something to talk about, because if you end up on a franchise or a TV show or something where you can't ask us to do like Big Bang Theory, because if you do that, there's nothing to talk about.
No. Same thing every week, and it gets very boring very quickly. I mean, the show itself is fine fun, but like it's not something we can break down and really
No.
discuss.
So it really has to be something we can really sit with and talk about. And, it's something that I think about this a lot. And I think it's also because I'm wearing the shirt and I'm kind of catching it on the video. But it's like the Universal Monsters would be really fun, but it becomes there's a lot there. There's 30 movies, very similar to the MCU. You're getting into a lot. And there's a whole lot of, can we talk about that a lot? Like after a while, can you? Like, because I like a lot of that stuff, but
Yeah.
it starts to, wear a
Right.
little thin.
Exactly. But getting to do those longer term franchise, which is what I think the Patreon will be for like those longer ones that would take up too much time on a main show. And it does allow us to do those things that I like, universally liked, allows us to use those as like break-ins when we need to take time off. And so we won't have to take a time off. We can't go this week instead. I'll plug in the latest MCU one we did there as like a fill in there. And then it also allows us to do those series that we really want to get to in terms of the shorter term series that we talked about, doing Ghostbusters, doing
I want to do Ghostbusters so bad.
doing Back to the Future, something I definitely desperately want to do as well. And then like there's like four or five film franchises that we seem to actually really excel at. John Wick was a great one of our best watched series of our show. Again, four movies and done or whatever. Although we will add to that, of course, when Ballerina comes out, we'll add that to the playlist or whatever and do that as well. But that's what the longer terms, and gets us basically have our cake and eat it too. We do the MCU despite having like how many movies they have in there. We also get to keep going with our normal mindset of the other shows we're doing. To this point, that's what we're doing this week. We're getting closer now to finally getting to the end of the big three, which is what we started the podcast with. We started the podcast as a horror podcast, and right off the bat, we're like, well, we're definitely doing Michael, Jason, and Freddy. Those are the big three. And here we are. I don't know how many episodes we are in now, but how many years we've been doing now. 2 years, 3 years. We're finally getting close to the end. This week's episode is Freddy's Dead, the 6th entry into the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. And after this, we only have two more, because we only have New Nightmare and then the
remake, because we've already done Freddy versus Jason. I realize in hindsight we should have waited to do Freddy versus Jason once we got theoretically what we should have done was Friday and Nightmare and alternated. Because this is what we've talked about in the past of like alternating a franchise where like Alien and Predator, we do like the release order of all of them. That way you're kind of alternating between the movies.
Which are absolutely what we're going to do for that. When do we do that franchise?
Right. We probably should have done that here to get to Freddy vs. Jason, but I digress.
It would have been fun, honestly. Thinking about it, like even digressing later, it would have been longer and more absurd. But if we were going to do the big three, we might also just done the big three as one thing, just alternated like every time. Like there's insert Halloween in there as well, and just put them all together as well, because that would have been a nice juxtaposition of where they were in the years. Like we could see the development and we always talk about how they bounce off each other. We could actually watch that happen in person. Hindsight is 2020. What can you do? So I look forward to doing that.
It's all right. I mean, but I guess we're back in time again. We're going in the way back machine as we always do. It's now 1991. The 3D craze is well over, but for some reason, New Line was like, wouldn't it be great if we did a 3D Nightmare on Elm Street film, but only in the last 10 minutes. It's not the full movie.
Right.
Which then when you watch it in 2025, or literally any time outside of seeing it in the theater, it's a little awkward and weird, kind of like the movie itself, not in a bad way. This movie's got a weird rap.
Yes.
And understandably, because it's a weird movie. And that's saying something considering the state of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. But in 91, Rachel Talalay, fantastic director who has worked on Doctor Who and Tank Girl and all sorts of things. She was someone who was very involved in the franchise to this point. She had been producing the movies and like very involved in the series as a whole. And so they put together one last film because New Line had decided they were ready to move on. And we ended up with Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, a film that is 89 minutes, clearly needs to be about 110. And it was once upon a time. There is another version of the movie that they've never actually let see the light of day, but it's one that is a lot more character heavy, that involves like the main character finding out more about her past, talking about her dreams. There was a lot of character stuff that unfortunately probably should have been here.
Right.
Because in its current state, Freddy's Dead is not necessarily a bad movie. It's a weird one coming off the last film because it picks up none of the threads. It changes a lot of what you know about Springwood. It changes a lot of what you know about Freddy's past. But it also comes off almost like a parody. And that's the weirdest part about it. And it's not necessarily that it's bad. Again, it's not really a bad movie. But Talalay thought that the movies had gotten too serious and wanted to do something a little more comical. But you turned it up to 11, which allows Robert Englund to give a really fun performance. But there's nothing scary about this film.
This is so worlds away from A Nightmare on Elm Street, like the original Nightmare. This is like as far away as they have ever gotten. And I understand what they were trying to do a little bit because, quite frankly, even though we revisited Nightmare on Elm Street 5 last time, The Dream Child, and we both liked it more than we had remembered, at the time, it was considered to be very tired and dying, and it made the lowest amount of money. And I can understand the accusations because it didn't really do anything new. There were some kind of cool swings it took overall, but for the most part, it was definitely a dying breed. And slashers in general were dying. Halloween was going downhill at that point. That was after Halloween 5. Jason wasn't exactly stalwart at this point either. It just seemed like it was all kind of like, we're doing.
It was all falling apart, man. Like the wheels come off the cart.
Right.
Like it's kind of, I hate to say it, but it's kind of what we're seeing in real time right now with the superhero stuff. And it's the stuff that we've seen with the Westerns. Things have their time, and eventually the audience kind of moves on.
Yeah, but back in the day, instead of like going onto Twitter and like ranting about it and getting very angry about it, people just stopped watching. That's what they did back in the 80s. They just stopped watching it. Okay.
Or they sent letters. They love to send letters.
That's true.
Because, look at the Michael Keaton stuff when he was cast as Batman. People were sending letters.
That's true. Really handwritten letters. They really care because they actually had to take the time to physically write a letter, address it out, stamp it, and send it. It was
yes, exactly.
Send it out. Send that to the internet, as Johnny Lawrence would say. Yeah. It is. But you're right. But Rachel Talalay had been there from the beginning, so it's not like she wasn't involved. She understood how Nightmare on Elm Street worked. So it wasn't a case of a director. It wasn't the case of like the name of the French director who directed Halloween 5, who basically came in and just said, I don't get it. I want to do my own thing, whatever it is. She knows what she's doing, and so she actively was deconstructing to reconstruct. And I think in some ways she actually had great success. It wasn't a home run. That was the problem. And that's partially because of execution, not necessarily due to direction. Some of it was performance. Some of it was due to editing, like you said. Some of it was the writing wasn't entirely there. And
to your point, it's real weird when you see who wrote this movie, by the way, because it's Michael DeLuca.
Right.
Michael DeLuca, a dude who is, and you look at his filmography and you kind of get it because he's got like the weirdest, ricketiest filmography where he, on one end, he produced like The Social Network and the Fright Night remake and Moneyball and Captain Phillips. And on the other end, he did like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe I'm saying this, Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance, Cowboy Ninja Viking, all these like weird 50 Shades of Grey, like A Man Apart. Like you start to look at it and you're like, Lost in Space 98. What the fuck, dude?
Is going
and he
on?
wrote Judge Dredd.
Right.
Like the Stallone Judge Dredd, the bad Judge Dredd.
But he also wrote In the Mouth of Madness,
which is amazing.
It's amazing, right? It's just like, I don't know what we're doing here at this point. He did also actually he was involved in Nightmare 5 as well. He did have like a role as production executive, whatever that necessarily means. I don't know how intense it is, but in other words, he also had that same credit on Old School. So, so it's a very weird dichotomy for sure.
So it's just very bizarre, man. Like, and you watch it and you're like, huh, all right then. Like, that's a thing.
You know what else he produced? It's one of your favorites.
One of my favorites.
2011.
Other than Fright Night?
2011. I was going to say 2011's Fright Night. Yeah.
That was the one I was saying. It was the remake, like for me, that's one of those. It's so good, dude.
I have never watched it. Still, I've never watched the
Still?
2011 one. I'm getting there. It's in my project with your movies anyway.
I
I've gotten
know.
there in that list at this
I
point.
I'm just I'm honestly more surprised, and not because, like, generally speaking, when I'm like, "Hey, man, I think you should watch this thing," you jump on it pretty quickly,
Yeah,
and I've been beating this drum with you for so
I
long
know.
because I legitimately fuck, I'm just gonna get into it now. Thanks a lot, man. So, for me, horror remakes are a dime a dozen. Obviously, we're gonna get into one, not that long from now on this podcast, and so most of them kinda seem to miss the point. They miss the mark. They don't always land. Some of them are fine too. I'm not saying that they're all bad. Far from it. I actually liked Friday 2009.
Yeah,
It was kind of a bridge film of, like, taking all the things that you like about the first 4 and finding a way to do it. It's actually pretty fun.
yeah,
Fright Night 2011 is like the perfect storm of updating a thing while understanding where the original came from and paying homage to it while also doing its own thing. Plus, you have an incredible cast. When you look at that cast, it's kind of stacked.
yeah. It
Like,
is really.
it really is. And Colin Farrell has never been scarier. He's fucking awesome in it. It's like if Jaws was a vampire living next door. And that is like a ringing endorsement if I've ever said it. And also, David Tennant is incredible in it.
Anton Yelchin is in
Oh,
it.
yeah. Anton Yelchin obviously
And I
is.
gotta say, even without sight unseen, I'm looking at the casting and like Christopher Mintz-Plasse as Evil Ed just
Uh huh.
makes so much sense at that time. Like
Well,
it's
yeah. And like
complete
a
sense.
young Dave Franco.
Yeah, absolutely.
Imogen Poots, obviously, who had worked with, like, she and Anton would work together later on
Mhm.
Green Room. So,
Tony
like,
Collette.
yeah, Tony Collette plays the mother. Like, it's got an incredible cast. I love that movie. It's got some great sequences that are like absolutely terrifying. It's got great horror, like comedy though too. David Tennant is freaking amazing.
Yeah, I love David Tennant. I've always loved David
And
Tennant. You know that.
and like this version of his character, instead of being like the midnight TV host, being like a David Blaine type who's a magician who is also actually just an asshole, is perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something we actually probably got to cover one day. I'm not gonna lie. This is something we're gonna do. Like I think
I
we're
would
gonna
love
we're
to.
gonna do a series of like horrors, great horror films and their remakes and their great remakes or their kind of thing. And like that don't have like long runs. Like obviously Friday had a long run. Friday Night's Not didn't have a long series. I think there was there was a sequel, but was there a third one?
Yeah, there was a sequel, and then I
I don't know
think
if there
there
was
was
two.
also a direct-to-video sequel to this one, weirdly enough.
Oh, really? Okay. But as
Like
far as the
like,
original series went, there's just the first. There's just two of them originally, correct? Or was
I
there a third
believe
one?
that is accurate.
Okay.
I'm looking now because now you're making me think. The problem is it's like Creepshow. Like, there was a 3rd Creepshow, but it went
Right.
direct to video, like, many years later.
Well, it looks like it was just the sequel,
Oh, yeah, yeah, and
88, and
just
then
the
the
remake.
remake and the remake. So yeah,
Okay.
that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. When we have like a series like that, we could just do like the basic deal. We could do that. We could actually do a whole
No,
series
there
of them
was.
for
There was
everything.
also a 2013 one. Fright
Okay.
Night 2. Yeah,
Oh, right.
2013.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there
Right.
was. Not a good thing, but again, there was a sequel that went direct to video.
Right. Fair enough. A lot of things we can talk about. Yeah, you know what? Honestly, guys, in the chat, if you want to throw out some things that you'd want us to do, or potential series ideas you want to do, or even potential like groupings of movies, you think that would be kind of a cool thing to do. We're always open to discussion for anything, obviously. We'll see, but that's definitely something I could see us foresee us covering at some point, given your love for it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, I actually rewatched that when I was on my, trip to Florida. I watched it
Right.
on the plane on the flight. It's
Nice.
one of those movies that I have on my iPad at all times.
Nice.
It's just it makes me happy. It's a comfort movie at this point. So, one of the weird things about this one, though, to get back into what we're talking about with, Freddy's Dead, not only is it kinda, like, winking at the camera the entire time, it's almost very meta in its approach. Similar to what we were just talking about Fright Night, weirdly enough, this movie has a weird cast of cameos. Not necessarily like day players in the film, but like Alice Cooper shows up as Freddy's father. Like,
Right.
Tom Arnold and Roseanne are in this. Johnny Depp has a cameo. Robert Shea shows up again. Like, it's got a weird kind of winking at the audience, knowing what they're doing sort of thing.
It's what's funny about it is like it's like we've had series before, like Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. That was supposed to be the final movie, but it was never really treated as much and more like a, that's it. This is a good way to end the movie. This was like they were trying to be like celebratory about it, like make this a great celebration. Like, this is the final Freddy, we're gonna go all out, and
Yeah.
people wanted to get involved because it was the last Nightmare on Elm Street movie. Johnny Depp's like, okay, I'll come because this is the last one. I'll come back because Nightmare started my career in the first one. Tom and
Right.
Roseanne, same type of thing. Like, they's like, this is Freddy's awesome. I want to be in on that last one. Robert Shea, of course, because he's such a big, like, obviously the guy who helped build Freddy in the back in the day with Wes Craven. Like, yeah, I'll make an appearance in the last film. Of course, unshock to everybody else, but Freddy's gonna come back a couple years later, actually, in fact.
Right. Well, but the funny thing with this though too is, like, to that point, they really went in on all this. Like,
Yeah.
if you know anything about the history of this film, they even did like a mock funeral for Freddy at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. And a bunch of the actors showed up and like laid him to rest. And then there was the whole thing where Los Angeles was like, we're going to declare a Freddy Krueger Day. And then everyone's like, he's a fucking serial killer, right? And so they very quickly like backed off of that. And they're like, well, maybe we won't do that. But like, they staged a full funeral for Freddy,
Right.
and they were laying the franchise to rest because New Line at this point, even though it was the house that Freddy built, was done with Freddy. And they
Yeah.
had been for a little bit, because you could tell, and especially with this one, and especially with the last one, they really weren't sure where to go.
I have something too, and I hate to say this, I mean, he's making accusations about it, but I almost felt like they were kind of trying to bury Freddy because they're almost like, not embarrassed is too strong of a word, but they wanted to move on to like higher brow
Yes.
stuff instead of slasher films at this point. Even though slasher is what built you. That's what built you. You should give some respect to it. But they're kind of like, all right, we like it. We know this. It did a lot for us, but we got to move on. We're done here. So
yeah, because what 1990 TMNT comes out, so they're getting in like the superhero action game.
Yep.
Then it wouldn't be that long after that they started getting their hands on some of the Jackie Chan movies, because Rumble in the Bronx and First Strike are both New Line films that they acquired from overseas. Then they got into doing Rush Hour. Like, they really did try to start kind of rebranding the studio, getting away from this.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, the original script for it was even more so trying to do. It's pitched the way we have been pitching some of these legacy sequels now. Like, the idea
Yeah.
was the original script was like the main character was supposed to be Alice's kid from the Dream Child, and then we're gonna have like return appearances from some of the Dream Warriors. I'm not sure how they would have done it because they were all dead, but they're gonna come back. Who knows how they're gonna do it? They're gonna return, and it's gonna be a big thing. Like, I supposedly Freddy was gonna kill Alice finally, and they're gonna have all of them come back and return and help. And that's like kind of like an Avengers Portal moment to a degree, like a much smaller degree for Nightmare. And that's the big way to end.
It probably would have been close to what the Freddy versus Jason versus Ash 2
100%.
comic was going to do, which is like,
Absolutely.
yeah, they use the Necronomicon obviously in that one comparatively, but like
Right.
the idea is that they actually bring their souls out and they actually fight Freddy very similarly.
Unfortunately, that script was discarded, and they went on. We actually got a screenplay by Peter Jackson also at the time,
Yep.
which I'm very interested to see read what that would have been. I know that the idea was basically that the teenagers didn't see him as a threat anymore, and they were like taking sleeping pills and stuff to like go into Freddy World to find him, kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know.
I like that. That's
Jackson,
actually great. It's because they actually weirdly tackle that in some capacity. In Freddy versus Jason, but it's not necessarily that they're going to look for him, but they stop being afraid of him because they forget about him, because the families and the parents are like dosing them with shit, and they just pretend Freddy doesn't exist.
Right.
The idea of people actually actively going to look for him is beyond fascinating.
Right, absolutely. So, and because it's Jackson, and Jackson he's a brilliant writer at the time too. He's a big horror guy anyway. So yeah, seeing him have his vision on that would have been very fascinating to watch. But we don't get that, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we get this kind of Twin Peaks inspired kind of thing.
Actually, it's very weirdly Lynchian, which is ironic that we're covering this now, considering his passing very recently, which was fucking heartbreaking. But my favorite thing was, I haven't seen the internet come together in so long in the way that they did around David Lynch. It was actually super heartening.
It was very much so. Like, something that I really was happy to see, despite the tragedy of what it was. But it all made sense. Everybody's going through tough shit right now, obviously. But they just came together and just looked and said, "This is a guy we should aspire to be like." It was very, very heartwarming. And in fact, I would love to see, and no disrespect to Rachel Talalay, who we've talked about how much we like, I would love to have seen a David Lynch Freddy. that actually could have worked out very kind of cool in a way.
He would never touch it in a million years, but I
Never.
love the idea of it, and this is probably the closest thing we would ever get to it because
Absolutely.
in some capacity, it almost feels like Firewalk with me because you got some retconning, you're kind of going into some past stuff, you're kind of involving like the how did we end up here? Because Firewalk with me, a lot of it is the last 7 days of Laura Palmer's life, but also there's all the stuff with what happens after that, and like
Right.
so it's just kind of fun and fascinating to think about. But this movie, especially with how like when you get to Springwood, and here's what's interesting: this part of the film is such a like weird thing that we never deal with in any of the other movies, but this idea now that Springwood has no children. And
Right.
like the parents have all gone off the reservation. They all seem catatonic. They're all trapped in this world where they can't have kids anymore, and they're obsessed with Freddy. And it comes out of nowhere.
It honestly, like, looking at this again, like, I don't know if I mentioned this on here before here. I went to this this is a movie I didn't like very much growing up, like, when I first saw it. It was always kind of towards the bottom of my list, and I will, spoiler alert, say I did actually like it a lot better now. I went into this partially because I'm like, Rachel Talalay, I know I love her from Doctor Who. Let me try to reconcile that in my mind with what I'm seeing here, and when I did that, I realized there's actually a case we made this a big episode of Doctor Who.
It
To a
is
degree.
actually.
Like, there's a lot of Doctor Who in here, to be honest,
Yeah.
without the Doctor. Basically, it's a doctorless Doctor Who episode, pretty much. Because it did exactly that kind of world where it's a surreal world where there's no children around. There's that barrier around it. It's like basically a combining of like a Twilight Zone episode with Doctor Who, and that's when you get that. You get when you add Freddy Krueger to it, that's what you get pretty much.
No, and you're 100% right. And it's so funny because I've talked about this before. Weirdly enough, this was the movie I had seen the most in the franchise
Right.
to this point because it was the one, for whatever reason, it was always kind of around. It was always on when I was growing up. If it was like on TV, I would just watch it. It was up there with like Halloween 4, a movie, Halloween 4 and Halloween 6. I've told you multiple times. I have seen those movies probably more than any other of the Halloween films outside of the original because they were the ones that Showtime used to play all the time.
Mhm.
Don't know why. I assume they just had a Miramax deal of some sort, and so they were going through the catalog, but they would just cycle through 4, 5, and 6 all the time.
Yep.
So this was another one of them, and I just remember always growing up with it, thinking it was kind of funny, kind of goofy, kind of weird, but like that maybe that's part of why the franchise never really stuck with me because every time I'd go back to some of the other ones, I was like, this is like dark and strange and not kind of like weird and fun like this movie is because this movie is actually fun
Right.
in some capacity, but it's also just now as an adult and having revisited it going through all the movies, it's so bizarre
Yes.
and it just feels so tonally out of place. And
And that's
I
why, really quick, I just want to interject. That's why I think I didn't like it growing because I was the one
sure,
who grew up with Nightmare 3 was my original love, and Nightmare 1
yeah,
was always those two. I appreciated 4 and 5. 2 was its own thing, whatever. But at least it all kind of felt like it was at least in that same ballpark. And then we get to this, and it's like, wait, what the hell are we doing here? What are we even like? This tone is completely not Nightmare on Elm Street, which is why I
right.
was kind of turned it off. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's just that you have to get on board with what it's doing right away, or else you're going to be out. You're going to check out.
Yeah,
And
and it's so funny because it has a weird like Escape from New York opening of like giving you
let me
this
tell
this
you,
is the world.
the begin
What?
that opening with the quotes. That's what did it
Yes.
to me. That opening tells you exactly what this movie is. We have a Freddy Nietzsche quote, very profound, very in depth, very like never know, like dark. Do you know the terror of he who falls asleep? To the very toes he is terrified because the ground gives way under him and the dream begins. Oh shit! What are we getting into? What are we
And
getting
then it's
into?
prime time,
Pete,
bitch.
welcome to primetime, bitch.
Yeah.
Freddy Krueger. It's like, oh, this is that movie. Okay,
Well,
gotcha.
and then it goes and then it's like it shows the shot of the United States and it's like somewhere 10 years in the future and it's just Escape from New York. Like it's kind of the same idea and then you're to your point, it starts like it's the Twilight Zone episode with the gremlin on
Yeah,
the plane
yeah.
because he's on a plane and he's trying to get out of Springwood and he wants to be away from the window because he keeps thinking he's seen Freddy on the wing. Like
Mhm.
it is 100% just a Twilight Zone episode.
It really is. And and you don't know what's going on. They do that whole thing where because he says some weird things like not again and stuff. You're like, wait, what? What's going on? You don't quite get what's
Well, and
going
they said
on.
that, they cut some of that from the movie. So
Right.
the opening was longer back before.
Wish they kind of kept those because although it actually was effective in a way because it kind of means it did draw you in to be like, wait, what is going on here? Let me
My
see
favorite
what's
is
going on
the
there.
"Don't be a pussy," and then it fucking she gets ripped out of the plane.
That was classic Nightmare there at that
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
The funny part is it's to a soundtrack of the Goo Goo Dolls. So I'm like, this
yeah.
is so early for Goo Goo Dolls. I mean, I know they came out that early, but they didn't really get to be big until like about 4 or 5 years later. I'm like, oh my god, there's 2 Goo Goo Dolls songs on this track on this soundtrack. I was like, oh my god, that's Johnny
Well,
Wrestling.
not just that, then Iggy Pop does like, you
Yeah.
know how we talk about we love the Dawkins song from
Yep.
the 3rd one? The Iggy Pop song in this is bad. It's
Oh, so
real
good.
bad.
It's so bad.
It's so bad. Like, it plays over the credits, and it's so funny because at the end of the movie, the credits are showing you all the stuff that's happened in the franchise, and you're like, "Wow, this would all be great if I didn't feel like these." It kinda reminds me of Gladiator 2. Stop reminding me of the things that the first movie did better. Like,
Right.
please stop showing me footage, from a better movie. I'm
It's
begging
trying to
you.
be Lethal Weapon 4, and it's failing miserably. That's
Well,
what
yeah,
it
because,
is.
like, Lethal Weapon 4, at least it feels earned, and it's just
Right,
you're not even seeing scenes. You're
right,
just seeing pictures of them making a movie, and it's
right,
wonderful.
right.
Like, that's why I
Exactly.
don't want a 5th Lethal Weapon. There's
Yeah.
a lot of reasons I don't want a 5th Lethal Weapon at this point, but specifically the end of that movie makes me go, "We don't need that."
No,
Like,
we
we've
don't.
done this. Like,
Right,
it ended. It's over. Let it be.
right. Granted, if it comes out, I'll be one of the first ones to watch it because
Yeah,
I do
no
love the
shit,
series.
obviously.
But yes, I know you're absolutely right, though. If it doesn't come out, I'm actually just fine with the ending. I would end it for sure.
Well, I mean,
Um,
that franchise should end with, "We're not friends, we're family." Like, fuck the rest of that, and I don't want it without Donner. Like,
yeah.
between that and them finally being like, "We're gonna finally do Goonies too." WB, go what are we doing?
Right, it's too late for both of those at this point. Goonies 2 actually has a better chance, but it's still without Donner, so I don't love it.
Well,
Um,
we talked about this privately, like,
yeah,
I'll get into it, it's fine. Yeah, it's really I love that it's the cast who's been trying to will this into existence, like,
yeah,
they've been doing it for a long time, they've been wanting to make one, I love that they love each other, I love
yeah,
that they wanna make it, don't get me wrong. However, you can't really do it now with that cast unless they're just side roles, and that's
right,
not the Goonies sequel I really want,
right,
and I'm not even saying that in like a because The Force Awakens, right? We love The Force Awakens because Han is, like, majorly part of the film,
100%.
and it works because you're handing it to a new generation while also still playing into it, but, like, it's gonna be different unless the parents are fully involved in this because The Goonies is
Right,
one film with one cast,
right.
and unless you're making it like Ocean's 11 with this cast, which you know what? There's your move. If it's like the adults in like an Ocean's 11 style heist, I could be into it.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, man. It might be a little too late.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it, I actually would like to see because the easy way and what they're gonna try to what they will do is have a new group of kids, it'll be their kids
Yes, it's gonna
doing
be
it,
their kids.
and it shouldn't be. Let the adults, go on an adventure trying to recapture their childhood in a way, and, make it
That
that
would be
the
more
joke,
fun.
almost like a Lethal Weapon, it's like, "I'm getting too old for this shit, Mikey." Like,
Yeah.
"It's Mike now, but okay." Kinda something like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of thing. And you could have Sean Astin and Ke Kwan do it kinda it could be fun if done that way, in that proper way, make fun of each other and, getting themselves in these, situations, like, "Jesus Christ, again? Junk again?" It's like
Yeah.
that. That could be fun, but they won't go that
That could
route,
be
though.
fun, but that's not what they're gonna do
Right.
probably.
No.
Well, the one hope is that Chris Columbus, who wrote the original, is actually I think this is the first time that in all the years that this movie has attempted to be developed, I think this is the first time he's been directly involved,
I think so too.
which I think is nice. It's interesting too because he's been trying to make a Gremlins sequel for so long, and that was the other part of the announcement is that he was working on a treatment. But it sounded like they also dumped the original one, which is probably better
The better.
because that first version of what he wanted to do sounded really dark and like not in a fun way.
Right.
Because it was about basically killing Gizmo and being like, we need to put an end to all this, and it's like that's not really this franchise. Like
No.
it needs to. We can't go from like dark comedy to straight darkness. Like
Right.
you gotta just either be the horror comedy or the comedy and just lean in on it. So
Right.
I'll be very curious what kind of comes of that, especially because WB had like an entire show about Gizmo that was that little animated series they did a couple years ago on HBO Max.
Right.
So like they clearly are not going to kill off the dog.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, but I would like that's actually speaking that's another series. If they come out with Gremlins 3, we'll definitely do the whole the Gremlins trilogy on here there for sure. Because I
I
love
was going
those
to say
movies.
the whole franchise, all two of them.
All two of them, plus the new one. I think we'll wait for
Yeah.
the new one to come out, so we have a trilogy at least. But yeah, it is obviously we're a bunch of remakes now, remakes happening, and this is what makes it so worse that we still haven't got a Nightmare reboot yet. We still talk about this one every week, but like we should at this point, it's
Well, same with
baffling.
Friday.
Yes, it's baffling. But really quick, guys, I want to go back. I realized what made this film wrong for me. Also, going back to the soundtrack aspect of it, and I mentioned the Goo Goo Dolls. The Goo Goo Dolls just don't scream Freddy Krueger to me.
No,
That's what kind of takes it out. It's like alt 90s pop rock. That's not Freddy Krueger.
This movie is weirdly so you watch certain movies and you know exactly when they were made. This is one of those movies. Like everything about it screams 1990 film. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
Like it
absolutely.
just looks like a 1990 film. It sounds like a 1990 film, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I feel like even Dream Warrior at least feels like an 80s film, but also like a little more timeless. It doesn't feel trapped by the constraints of when it was made. But Freddy's Dead kind of feels very specifically down to waiting too long to do a 3D film with Freddy.
And like even the way you said it, how did you feel about the way they tell the audience it's time for 3D?
It's so silly, and it's honestly worse now in hindsight. Like because nothing about what they're like this idea that somehow 3D glasses become a weapon that you can use inside the dream is so silly. It's so dumb. Like, and not really in a fun way because there's really no explanation for it. Like, it's just a thing that they do because Yaphet Kotto is like, these glasses will give you power in his world. And you're like, I'm sorry, what? They're 3D glasses. He goes, yeah, and in our world, they mean nothing. Yeah, we're aware, man. We're very aware that it means nothing. There's no reason for this.
Right. It just made no sense. It was such a gimmick for gimmick's sake, and it was the worst way to be a gimmick for gimmick's sake. Like,
Yes.
we knew it was a gimmick for gimmick's sake, and you're pointing out that it's a gimmick for gimmick's sake at that point. Just, I don't need to be reminded of that. It's like it goes partial with reminding us that better movies were made. It's like we don't need this.
No, it's honestly, I'll say this. All things being equal, I've talked a lot about in the past that I don't think like 5 had any idea how to end, and it's kind of obvious.
Right.
This one clearly knew how it wanted to end, but it all comes together in also like kind of the dumbest way that it also doesn't work. So like
it had an ultimate ending, but not how to quite get to that ending. That's the issue was, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the last line of the movie just being Freddy's dead and basically Lisa Zane looking into the camera as she says it is just like, again, I know that they're trying to be meta and funny about it, but like it kind of just falls on its face.
Yeah, let me give you a point. This is I do want to make this point. I made this off air, and I was actually talking to Lego about this. She likes this film a lot as well, but I really did not like her performance, Lisa Zane's performance in this film, and it really kind of undercuts the whole thing for me. And it's because the film is, I mean, I like it. I try to liken it to Naked Gun, which is a weird choice here, but if you look at Naked Gun, Leslie Nielsen takes the role so seriously in this zany world, and that's what makes the film work as a whole. Lisa Zane is trying to be wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I know what movie I'm in. And unfortunately, that undercuts what this is trying to do. I think if she had taken this like completely seriously and had really performed it with a undercut of serious emotion intended, you could still have fun with it at her expense, not at her expense, but like instead of this with her in a way, instead of her trying, it almost like she tried too hard to go, this is the kind of movie we're making, guys. See, and that kind of undercuts what they're doing. We know what kind of movie you're making by now at this point, so we don't need you to tell us what kind of movie you're making.
In some capacity, you're absolutely right. I feel like they felt like they had to because they tonally went so far the other direction.
Right.
But the
Right.
problem is again, it also I don't know, it's strange because it just feels outside the performance compared to everyone else.
Mm.
When you look at, like, even Robert Englund is just having the time of his life, just being a
Oh,
ham, and he's been doing that for a little while.
right.
But they also give him, like, some real bad one-liners that you're like, "Oh my lord, the Power Glove one kills me every time." It's so silly, it's so stupid, but
One of
I
my
do
favorite
love
ones.
the, "Hey, I beat my high score." Like, and then he starts laughing, I die. I think it's hysterical.
I
Like,
did
that one.
too. It was so it went to the point where it was so bad it was good again. That's what exactly what it was. Because I liked the idea as I think about Freddy's never played video games in his life, so it makes it actually funny that he's loving it, like the nice graphics.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Yeah, great graphics.
It's like, what are we even doing here? But it makes sense. It makes sense in this specific world, which
Well,
is
and I'll
fun.
say this, like, credit where credit's due. I don't think the cast gets a lot to do, which I think is part of the problem.
Right.
But I also love Breckin Meyer and Sean Greenblatt, like Yaphet Kotto. Everyone in the movie is actually really fun. Leslie Dean, like they're actually having a good time. And I really like that. So it actually adds a sense of like fun to it. And again, Lisa Zane is trying. I just think that her performance might go a little too far on the other side.
Yeah.
Whereas like
She
Breckin
makes some
Meyer just being
choices.
the stoner dude who is really kind of perfect. And I do love the idea that they're all just orphaned kids. Like it's kind of nice.
Shoot.
I don't know why, but they're them just all being orphans is it's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, well, in this world especially, absolutely, it makes sense at this point. Is that because Freddy's going after children who are vulnerable, and that's what
Yeah.
these kids absolutely are. Breckenmeyer as a stoner is basically par for the course. Is basically playing his Clueless character for the most part. Honestly speaking, it's funny. Sean Greenblatt, I swore, like I kept watching the movie, I swore I knew him from somewhere, but I don't. But he puts on such a performance that I felt like I knew him. So I guess that's good for this role. Because actually,
I
yeah, he
kind of
did a
had the
great
same
job.
thought, honestly, because I kept looking and I was like, do I just not know him? But also, I definitely feel like I know him. And I
Somewhere.
started to wonder, and weirdly enough, so I put on Dead Poet Society at the bar the
Okay.
other day, and I was looking at it, and I was like, he kind of reminds me of Robert Sean Leonard. I mean,
Mm.
yes, Cat. I'm sure you all heard that too. My
Yeah.
lord, he was so loud. But so, um, he kind of reminds me of Robert Sean Leonard. So I wonder if that's part of it. But he just kind of looks like one of those guys who was in things and then he wasn't in things.
Yeah, yeah. Kinda like, I forget the actor's name now, the one who was in, Nightmare 4, as Alice's brother there that I
Oh
like
yeah,
so
yeah,
much.
yeah,
I
yeah.
actually like Sean I like John Doe in this role. Okay, so let's talk about the beginning. I wanna talk about, but we haven't really talked about the film part itself, more about our
We
reactions
kind of
to it.
have been. I know you think that we've been talking about our feelings, but let us. I
Right.
digress.
I mean, more like I'm saying we haven't talked much specifically about the film instead of more overall. But specifically about this film, like I love the fact we open up with this character, John Doe. And this, by the way, we never learn his name.
No.
Like that's a weird thing. He is our focal point for the first two-thirds of this movie. He's the one we're supposed to be like looking through or relating to. He's the one we're following. And
Because the idea is the mystery of he must be Freddy's kid because
right,
that's kind of the mystery of the film is that there's clearly a child.
child involved, child of Freddy. And you're set up to believe that. And there's no reason we shouldn't believe that because of the way the film is set up. Because of course, it's got to be the guy we're going after the whole time. And it turns out not to be true. It turned out to be Maggie, Lisa Zane's character, who is the daughter of Freddy instead of the son of Freddy. And the way they reveal that is actually to me, I thought it was actually kind of a well crafted enough kind of storyline. I don't know if the written's dialogue-wise story-wise, it kinda throws you off a loop here and there, but the
Yeah.
idea behind it actually works well and is surprising because it definitely pulls the rug out from underneath you. And the fact that we never ever found out his name is kind of a surprising thing. Like, because 'cause we're supposed to care about this character, and even after he dies, we're supposed to, like, have at least cared about him, and we just never know his name. His name is just John Doe. Um,
Yeah.
I like that, though. I kinda like that we left that vague and open. I kinda think that's kind of a cool, like,
Yeah.
niche part of the storyline.
It is, and honestly, like, his dying breath obviously is that he lets, Lisa Zane's Maggie know that, oh well, it wasn't me, it wasn't me. The child is it's a girl,
Right.
and
It's
of
a
course,
girl.
it's a girl, and the idea is that it's actually Maggie, and that's the other thing is I really do appreciate in the film that the idea is that Maggie actually was the one who turned on Freddy because or she sees him kill the mom.
Right.
And so she's actually the one who goes and outs him to the town, and they realize that he's been the killer because the mother had figured it out. She
Right.
actually stumbled into his sanctum, as it were, and found he has all these cuttings of all the stuff on the walls of what he'd been doing and stuff. And I like that too. That was another one of those like really smart kind of world building things where it was like, of course it would be his kid who turned on him. No wonder he hates kids so much. It's not even just the parents. It was also his own child,
Right.
which
Exactly.
is
That
why his last line being kids is actually like kind of funny and also just kind of sad.
Yeah, it showcases exactly why he was so upset, and actually gives him more motivation throughout the entire series. Like that's what he's going after the kids because the kid fucked him over in a way that even the parents didn't. Um, I really did like that aspect to it, and I agree with you with that. I think it works out very well for that, and I like him. I like her being because they try to do this whole thing where obviously she kind of teases, "Oh, it's in your blood. It's in your blood," and they kind of then it's a horror thing. They've done that before. Hell, they did it in Scream
Yeah.
recently, the more recent Screams, whatever. Um, this one they don't take it as seriously, but there's still that touch there, and I think it's an interesting idea to manifest itself. And having Maggie putting on the glove at one point was actually kind of cool. I thought this was a cool idea having her fight with Freddy like that in a
It's
way.
so funny that like there's two films pretty close together in Freddy's canon where someone uses his glove as like a method to kill him in some
Right,
capacity because obviously Freddy versus Jason very similarly like they shove it through him and then they use the machete to take his head off.
right. So funny.
So it's just kind of funny, yeah, and I liked that. In him being like, let daddy show you how to use the glove," and it's like, I think she can figure it out. There's blades on it, and it's gonna go into your stomach.
Yeah, there's not much exactly have to figure out there. You you stick the pointy. It's like Arya in Game of Thrones. You stick the pointy end, and that's
Oh,
what
I
you.
was gonna say, Mask of Zorro also
That's
when yeah,
absolutely,
pointy end
absolutely.
goes into the other man.
Another thing about the movie that I really like, speaking of like the original, you talk about the beginning again, how much does that remind you of Final Destination to a degree
Yeah,
too? Like had the whole
100%.
aspect of it as well. So maybe that.
Another, New Line Cinema production.
So good
Just
stuff.
throwing that out there.
It was though. It's definitely the parlay most when he says, "I was almost out," and that's when you're
Yeah,
like, "Oh wait, I thought I knew what was going on. Now I don't know what's going on," because like he was way too calm with the
yeah.
also the for being such a like excitable having a panic attack, and all of a sudden then she goes, "Don't be a pussy," and she gets ejected. Then all of a sudden he becomes like calm about it, kind of like, I was almost out. Like,
Yeah,
wait, what's going on?
yeah.
Oh, okay. This is kind of cool. Where am I going with this? All right, it's cool.
It's so interesting how long the opening is
Yeah.
because it's such a long dream sequence. You also get the funny Wizard of Oz reference.
Freddy's in the
I'm gonna
convention.
get you, my pretty, and your little soul too. I actually like that. I think it's very funny. It's very silly, but it makes me laugh. But I think credit where credit's due. It does tell you the tone of the film pretty upfront, which is why when you get to the scene when they finally get to Springwood and it's so like weird and Lynchian and strange that it's tonally almost a completely different movie.
Yeah, no, I agree because like one more thing that they did in the beginning that actually was completely this is the tone of the film. It's like they have speaking of New Line Cinema, who also put out The Mask a few years later, they have that like very cartoonish, like the bus comes and hits
Yeah,
him, and he like just on the bus and he gets pushed back into Springwood's barrier that way. Like I said, that's another thing. This is that movie. So I I think my dislike of the film when I was growing up is definitely more on me because this film told me in the first like 10 minutes, this is what this film is. And if you don't like it, then you don't like it. That's fine.
but
But
this is what it is.
this is what I'm presenting to you. So this might
Yeah,
so get on board. Get on board with me or go home kind of
yeah.
thing. Which is
I
fine. You do that sometimes.
it works, and again, I think it helps that like I like Carlos. I think he's a good character. I like Spencer. I like Tracy. Like everyone's good. The movie's missing kills. I admit
Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
Because there's only what, 2, maybe 3 overall,
Yeah.
which is crazy when you consider this is Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, and there's only a handful of kills. Um, and one of them is terribly unmemorable. I love the Spencer character. Maybe it's because 'cause I'm a stoner. I don't know. But I like the character, and he goes out so dumb, comparatively. Like, I love all the stuff in the video game. I think that's great, but in the real world, the bouncing up and down and then going down the stairs into a pit where she clearly could have caught him and doesn't is so dumb. And it totally undermines it. It comes off as almost camp in the wrong way.
Oh, 100%. I agree with you because honestly speaking, it's basically an off-screen death. You
Yeah.
don't get those in these movies. You don't have an off-screen death in these movies. I mean, I think it happened like once or twice else. Was there one other kill? I think it was maybe in Friday. I can't remember exactly what it was. When like you came across a body that was dead. But that's when you have like 10 kills in a movie, then it might be okay. But when like that's one of your kills is practically off screen, it's like, what are we doing here in this kind of movie? Like,
Yeah.
I know you're trying to make something different, but you can't disturb the core that much and expect to be successful with it entirely.
No. And so that doesn't quite land, which is kind of a bummer. And that's kind of the weird thing. So, like, then you get Tracy's dreams, which are really dark and, like,
Yes.
really weird because you find out she was abused.
Right.
Like, and that's, like, not just, like, abused, but, like, by her father. And
Right.
it's a really dark moment in a series that's pretty dark in comparison. And then it comes off as oddly cartoonish at the same time. And it works, but again, like, it feels so tonally out of place at times compared to what the movie is presenting, and I think that's my biggest takeaway, more
Yeah.
than anything, is that the movie is tonally kind of all over the
It's
place.
discordant with each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Itself, as you say. Yeah.
Again, not necessarily a bad thing, if you can get on the film's wavelength, but when it's kinda bouncing around like that, it can be a little difficult to keep up with, especially, again, at 90 minutes,
Right.
where it's just fast-paced, move, move, move. This movie needed more time.
100%, and I think it's hard to work the way you want it to because, like, if you want to add the humor and levity to it, which obviously Rachel obviously did and did a good job at a lot of the times and became sillier and goofier, and like I said, get on board and go home. But when you juxtapose it with those kind of the dreams that like Tracy had, it's like, see, that's not funny. There's not anything you can do about that to make that funny. It's just plain dark. You can have horror comedy that works. Nightmare has done that before, but it's never like undercut with like such serious things in a way. I mean,
Yeah.
and you enjoy. I mean, it's kind of a, maybe it's hypocritical to say that as murder, like saying murder isn't serious and slashing isn't serious, but that's kind of an accepted slashing thing. We get that's going on. To add this other part to it just makes it feel like you're doing a different movie now at this point.
Yeah.
So like we don't need to see that part of it. You need to
Well,
be
because
lighter with the
even
touch.
even Carlos, he talks about, like, his father abused him,
Mhm.
and that was why he's deaf in the one ear or whatever it is, because he has the hearing aids because he had been beat so much.
Right.
And again, it's a good character building thing, but it's just kind of there.
Right.
I love he has the best death in the movie. I'll say
Oh,
that
easily,
much.
easily.
It's the one that feels the most nightmare-y to
Yeah.
me, to that capacity, because it's the whole thing of Freddy takes, puts a different new earpiece into his ear, and it hyper extends basically, and so every sound sounds huge like a bomb, and
Right.
so he's dropping those pin needles and it sounds like bombs are going off. I loved that. I thought that was great.
I love that aspect of it as well, and like the threatening nature of that. He kept like threatening to like I'm gonna and like the the chalkboard with the nails on it as well. He just keeps threatening, going, "Oh, here we go, here we
Yeah.
go." I did love all that aspect. This is after, of course, he put the Q-tip through his entire brain. At
Right.
that point, it's like
Which again, great moment. um
100%.
there's just enough of those throughout. Again, well, I actually, there's not enough of that throughout, and yet this one is so good, it stands out comparatively, and I like it for that.
Yeah.
Um, it's just that there's all these little weird things in the movie where it doesn't quite come together with that. You needed more of that. Um, it needed a few more characters, and again, probably the 20 minutes of footage or whatever it was that was cut out. Because if we had spent more time with Maggie, I think I would have been more okay with where it goes by the time it's over.
Yeah.
Because like you don't get this idea that she really cared about her past until she cares. And then her mom is like so shocked by all of it, but it's clear they've also had this conversation before, but
Right.
we don't see it. You know what I'm saying? Like it just seems so odd. And then you have Yafet Kato, who's just kind of there.
Right.
He's a
And
dream doctor, but what?
that's upsetting to me because like Yaphet is a wonderful actor and a wonderful performer in
He's
all the things he's been
he's
in.
the best.
I mean, obviously a very big genre actor. Obviously, Alien, Running Man. He's just good at what he does, and you kind of
On
have him in this
movie, what is it?
role,
Live and Let Die, I think he's in.
and you have him in there, and they actually give him a good like role, not like the size of his role, but the idea of him being a dream doctor. Very cool idea, and very cool like person that could go up against Freddy in a way. But then you just underutilize him and undercut him, and it's like, why even bother with it at this point?
And I guess it's so interesting because there's this idea that Freddy is now somehow like the barrier is coming down, so he's somehow affecting the real world, but we don't really get an answer for why that is.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and I do wonder about that too, because in the film, like you'd think if he was a dream doctor, he could be looking at Nancy's notes, right?
Yeah.
But as far as we can tell, no one outside of Springwood even knows Freddy was a thing.
Right.
Enough that when the kids disappear after they die, the people are like, "Oh, they never existed."
Right.
And
It's a
again, there's
big
not really an
disconnect.
explanation.
And it's a disconnect, and I kind of understand why they disconnected it with it because the tone is so different. So it's like we can't. It admits pretty much that it can't be the same film that was in that
Right.
series, but like because it does that, it cuts it off from the lore. If you had used the lore still, like even if it was like kind of a detached kind of way, like you said, like the doctor reading Nancy's notes or going back to like Nancy's house or something, you're talking. You could have made the tone. You could have made that kind of like crossing the barrier and like holding hands with the previous films while still doing your own thing. But they decided instead to cut it off completely, and that kind of is for its detriment, I think, for sure. Because it feels like a standalone movie of a different franchise in a way. Which again, it goes harkens back to my initial argument against it was that it was so different. Like, it's why is this a Nightmare on Elm Street movie? Besides the fact that you're going to put Freddy Krueger in there, it's like it feels
Yeah.
like a different kind of movie. Not doesn't
It
make it a bad movie, but it's not necessarily a great Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
Yeah, and it ultimately comes down to, like, New Line really didn't have any interest in making this. Like, that's the truth of the matter. They really
Yeah.
just wanted to move on. They've said that as much, like and I think that it kinda hurt the film.
Yeah.
Like, it does. It undermines the film a lot because they aren't that interested in making it. So, because they're not interested, like, the resources, sure, they're there. It looks great. Like, honestly, it looks like it had maybe the most money in the film since the 4th one.
Yeah.
But boy, like, because they don't care, and I'm not saying that, like, the people involved who like, obviously Rachel Talalay cares.
Right.
Obviously the cast cares,
Right.
but
The studio doesn't.
the studio doesn't, and it's quite clear because there should have been more notes for this movie. There should
Right.
have been more of, like, trying to keep it in line with the others, not going so far the other direction. Again, it's not even necessarily a bad thing because I think the movie's actually a lot more fun than
Yeah.
it sounds like I'm saying, because
Right.
it is. Like, it is. It's fun to watch,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
it's not
it
what
does
we're used to.
expand. It expands on some of the lore. I like the idea of the dream demons or
Yeah,
whatever, like that. Like have basically
that
given Freddy
saved
immortality.
him from the
Yeah,
fire.
I think that's a cool idea. I really like that idea that we could have explored more. And in a way, it actually does. I don't know if Wes Craven would ever have admitted this, but like Wes Craven's New Nightmare kind of does touch on that
Yeah.
to a degree, in a weird kind of way. And I do think it's a great aspect to it, but they don't use it to its fullest extent because of not taking it seriously enough in a way. Um,
Yeah. Which is funny because, like, honestly, the other thing is I actually like all the stuff about Freddy's past on
yeah,
top of it. That's all the stuff in the movie that works really well, and I would have loved more of that,
seeing
honestly.
Robert Englund be young Frederick Krueger basically before you get Freddy Krueger, like you think it's just the young human mortal janitor or whoever he was at this point. If he's still I don't know who he was at this point,
Yeah.
but it does work out really well. And it's the most creepy is that right there. That those parts actually fit in well with the first 6 films or first 5
Yes.
films. Rather, they actually feel like they came from those films. And these are the only parts of the film that really do. When you go back out of there, it becomes just like Lynchian kind of like I say Lynchian. We've
Well,
mentioned
it's
that a few
Lynchian meets
times.
Dante. And here's
Yes.
the thing.
Yes.
So, we touched on it before, but, like, it's actually the perfect example of what happened from Gremlins to Gremlins 2, where
Mm,
they
yeah.
decided to go so far the other direction because Joe Dante didn't really want to make a sequel to Gremlins.
Right.
Like, he kind of felt like he had said what he had to say with the original.
Right.
And the studio kept saying, "Well, we need to make another one." So he's like, "Fine, I'll make it." And I'm going a totally wildly different direction, and he does. And I love it for it. Don't get me wrong. Like, Gremlins 2 is one of my all-time favorite sequels. I think it's
Mm,
amazing. I think it's the best Looney Tunes movie that's not a Looney Tunes movie ever made.
that's a good
Like,
call.
it's bonkers. It's amazing. It's a live action cartoon. If you can get on board with that, you have the time of your life.
It's
But
very
if
similar to that, and I like, similarly, when I first saw Gremlins 2, I didn't vibe with it the first time I saw it. I was kinda
yeah,
like, "This isn't Gremlins. This isn't Gremlins to me." But I watched it again, I was like, "Oh, I kinda get what's going for it." I do really like that now. It's one of my favorite sequels, especially of the '80s at the time. And yeah, Nightmare this movie tries to do that in a way, not to the same success,
yeah,
um, but I think part of it, I think this is her feature film
it
debut
is.
lately, so I still think there's some growing pains there as far as that goes, as far as not necessarily, like, the directing style, but, like, maybe, like, putting the project together,
Putting the project
putting the
together,
whole pieces together.
making sure that the script because I know she was, like, script editor and script producer on all these movies to that point, so, like, she's very well aware of how this stuff should come together.
Right.
It just feels like it again, I kinda think it's a studio thing too.
Yeah.
Like, you have a studio who's just not that interested, and they kinda went, "Fine, make whatever you're gonna make, and just be done with it."
Mm.
And instead of caring about, like, putting out a great Final Nightmare film, they put out a fun nightmare film that doesn't feel like it should be the last one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, they have the ending and, like, they try it's like they basically said, "Well, how can we kill Freddy to make him actually dead this time? Because I think we've already killed him a bunch of times, like, how do we make it stick?" And I guess, like, bringing him into the real world and then getting the dream demons out of him is the way to theoretically end it in a way, but I guess it's kind of inventive in a way. If you had to find a way to do it,
Yeah.
that's some way to do it. But it seemed like that was the goal. But beyond that, it just didn't seem like much of an ending. Beyond that, and the fact that we had those random cameos, like to like basically go, oh, that's interesting that they're here. Why are they here? Oh, because it's the last one.
Yeah.
Beyond that, it just doesn't feel like a very triumphant ending in a way
Why are Tom Arnold and Roseanne there?
because they're popular at the time. The
I
Roseanne
know, but
show
it's
was
just
there,
like
yeah.
but it's so
Ages it
random.
and dated it dates it so much, yeah, at this
Like,
point.
it's especially because you really don't interact with anyone else in Springwood outside of the lady at the orphanage,
Right,
which,
right.
again, love that scene. That
Mhm.
scene's weird and strange. The scene in the school is fine.
Yeah,
I do love that all the history relates to Freddy in some capacity,
right,
but, like, again, there's just not a the movie doesn't go out of its way enough to, like, create this version of Springwood. I
right,
would love to know how we ended up there. Like, there's
yeah,
no any reason for it. It just is, and that's weird because the last couple of films, it's not like that at all.
right. We just a big jump. So
Yeah,
something happened and that changed it all around completely, and I agree, that's we kinda need to see that instead of, like so it's almost like the beginning part is almost not a waste of time because you get introduced to the characters and everything else, but, like, Springwood should have been a bigger character in and of itself. They should have almost, like, in the beginning have just gone into Springwood somehow, and like be like I don't even know how you necessarily would do it off the top of my head, but they should have spent a lot more time in Springwood before getting to the end instead of like
the
'cause it takes too long
yeah.
to get there.
There's an entire another movie to be had just on what happened to Springwood
Yeah,
between those movies, you know? So, it's kind of strange because ultimately, like, there's not a lot to talk about with this movie either. I
no,
feel like we're
no,
already kind of, like, spinning our wheels to make sure that this is, like, our
hitting our
shortest
limit.
episode ever in so long, but I feel like I've said so much about what I wanna say because there's not a lot to say. That's
No,
the weird thing with this one, because they don't give us a lot to work with.
no,
They really
no.
don't, and it's weird, man.
It is weird. We're people who could talk about a lot of things, but there's just not a whole lot to go on. I will say that to what your point about there being a whole movie, it does feel like we open up like in the middle of the action.
Yeah.
So it feels
It's
like
trying
there's
to
a
be
whole
Raiders.
it is trying to be Raiders, trying to be A New Hope, it's trying to be something like that. It's like there's this whole thing like where there was a whole big story before this movie, between after 5 and before this movie with John Doe that we have no idea what happened and it gets set up.
Yeah, and
And
also what
in
happened to Springwood. I'm sure there's another Freddy like, story there.
yeah, absolutely. And in theory, it kind of is kind of like, okay, that's kind of cool because we're gonna get right to the action. We're gonna get right into it. Have to worry about like origins and stuff. But unfortunately, what it does is it makes you wonder like that story sounds like a little cooler. Actually, I'm trying to how do we get there? That sounds
Yeah.
like a cool story to tell instead of like the
I
finale, which
wonder if any of that's the stuff that was cut out,
I do.
because I know they said that they cut a lot of the opening of the film out. I wonder if that was some of it, because I've never really gone down the rabbit hole to find all the deleted material. I know
Yeah.
that there's a couple of the scenes, I think, but I don't remember exactly what's in it. Um, it just
Yeah.
seems odd.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go through. Is there any like notes we have left? I can go through the notes I have mentioned. Anything we haven't talked about yet? But yeah, I
Um,
know it's a shorter episode, and I apologize. I don't not apologize, but like it is what it is.
it's
Um,
just there's not a lot to say. I mean, just kinda looking at it, like, again, I love the cast, I just wish that there was more to do.
yes.
They kinda revert back to the stuff we've always known. Freddy needs to come out of the dream. It's very in line with the rest of the movies in that capacity. I'll say this, I like England a lot in it. I think it's almost camp in a good capacity, and that's okay. It really allows him to shine and be him, and I love that. I wish we had gotten more of his past, like I said, only
Yeah.
because I want more Robert Englund in most
Yeah.
things Nightmare on Elm Street. I
Yeah.
would have loved to see more. I'm glad that we continue to get more of the past. It's always things that the movies kind of promise to deal with, and then they kinda don't, and we kinda finally got some of it.
Right.
Loved that.
Robert
Otherwise,
Englund, I'll say, knew like I compare Robert Englund's performance to Lisa Zane's performance, and Robert Englund knew the kind of movie he was doing, performed his role perfectly within that style of movie, and
yeah,
didn't have to like break. Not he didn't have to be like smashing over the head with what kind of movie they were done. He just did it and did it well.
yeah,
He did what
100%.
Lisa Zane needed to do, and Lisa Zane didn't really do. A couple of things I love. One of the lines I love when John Doe is singing, and all of a sudden out of nowhere he's like in the cell or whatever.
Yeah.
That like random guy, I'll bring a bull over your head if you don't shut the fuck up.
It's so random, so good.
So funny in there. Um, I did like the past as well. I think the past was the best part. One of my favorite bits was it did something that when Nightmare is going right, it does well, and that's we've talked about it before in the podcast when you blur that line between is this a dream or is
Oh,
this
yeah.
not? And that doesn't happen a lot in this one. That's actually part to its detriment because like this is very cartoonish and you know when it's a dream. But the idea when they're in the van and then Carlos starts opening the
Oh,
map,
the map. The
he starts
map
going
bit
right,
is
right,
good.
and it's funny, but it's like, oh, we're in a dream now, aren't we? Okay,
Yeah.
now and that is very
It's
typical nightmare and
it's
good
actually
nightmare.
also the only real build for a potential scare because 'cause you're kinda waiting for Freddy to come through the map in some capacity and kill
Right,
him.
right.
I like that, and to your point, I actually think maybe this is why the end of the movie doesn't work as well in hindsight also, because to that point, the stuff that's supposed to be a dream, that's the 3D world that we
Mm,
don't really see, it's more detrimental once they pull Freddy out of the dream, because when she comes out, she's like, "Oh, I'm seeing things in the same way that I saw them when I was in there," and you're like,
then why are we bothering?
"Yeah," like, it just seems weird, it doesn't quite work because, again, the 3D is gone.
Right, right. Another line I like the dialogue when they're kind of figuring out that they were in dream world, and she's like, "What do you call that? Rational?" When he hits his head, he stuffs
Yep.
his head in the building or whatever. He says that. I was like, "That's it's one of the things that you want to have happen in a nightmare movie." Like, because all the parents and stuff always say something like, "Oh, this isn't real. This is you're all in your head." And then when something like that happens, it's like literally you can't explain it any other way except for what they're trying to tell you. And you're like,
Yep.
"Boom, there it is." You're like, "Yes, I love that having that moment for it." For sure, that's fun. Let's see anything else. I like the fact when the house becomes a transformer. Like all of a sudden they go
Yeah,
into the
that's kinda
house.
fun.
That's
Yeah,
kind
that
of
is
like
kinda fun.
it's like ah ha, ha, for the
Well,
audience in a way.
I gotta say, the movie does really lean on the dream stuff, I like that
Right.
a lot more than I think it gets credit for. Him parachuting out and then, like, getting pulled out of the van is a great moment. I love that.
Mhm.
Um, I wish this movie felt like it mattered. That's kinda my final note, and I'm just gonna say
Yeah.
that now. This is my, like, wrap up. I
Yeah.
wish it felt like it mattered because Freddy versus Jason also kinda just ignores it,
Yeah.
which means that ultimately it doesn't feel like it matters because we never really follow up with him having a child again. We never hear about it again. It doesn't help that really we only get Freddy versus Jason after this as like
Right.
this version of the canon because obviously New Nightmare is doing an entirely different thing.
Right.
So you get to this and it's just like it didn't matter. And that sucks because like it's right up there with Friday 2 where you're like, it doesn't really matter.
Right. No, you're not wrong, especially because we made a joke about it, like, Friday the 13th had its final chapter, but then New Beginning came and Jason Lives came, and all of a sudden that was a continuation of that storyline. In this case, Freddy's Dead is actually the last of the Robert Englund movies in that kind of capacity, because you're right, Freddy vs. Jason, while technically in that universe, is kind of its own thing in a way also.
Yeah.
And Wes Craven's New Nightmare is completely, totally out of the works kind of thing, out of the world kind of thing. You couldn't have Freddy's kid there. You could have Freddy's kid in Freddy vs. Jason, possibly, because they did try to draw back on all the different mythologies. But I'm not surprised they didn't draw back to this one because it was one of the least successful, like, as far
Movies.
as the fans go.
Yeah.
But I mean, it made more money than Nightmare 5.
Well, you put Freddy's Dead. You put it was the final nightmare. People show up.
Yeah, that's what it was. But culturally speaking, it's kind of like, oh, this is the bizarre, zany. This one is remembered for it is remembered for Tom and Roseanne, the Power Glove, Johnny Depp's cameo. That's really what's remembered for, honestly, and that's sad that that's his legacy, because like there's a lot more going on there than that.
100%.
But sometimes it's what is remembered is unfortunately not what you'd want it to be remembered.
Yeah. It's just one of those things, man. Like it's kind of a bummer ultimately. Like, and again, I know it sounds like we're being hard on the movie. I actually enjoyed watching it, but the
I think you're
problem
gonna be
is that
surprised when you hear our ratings, to be honest. I think because we both I think we rate it higher than you think we would, but like,
it's not, again, it's not even a bad movie. It's just it just feels like so oh my god, I can't even talk right now. It just doesn't feel like it matters.
Right.
It's inconsequential to everything.
Yeah.
Like it really is, and that sucks because it shouldn't be. It should be better than this.
Well, I think I'm just kidding this now, and it seems like it's such an obvious it's an obvious conclusion to make, and maybe I'm just slow, but I realize what it is. The fact that this is the final film, and they chose to make the final film be the one that's completely off tone with the entire franchise, makes it hard to reconcile as the final movie, because it doesn't feel like the final film in the franchise, because it doesn't feel like part of the same franchise anymore. It feels like a totally different movie. It almost feels like it's supposed to be a rebirth. And like, this is almost like a new Nightmare on Elm Street series start. If you're gonna have a final movie and you've spent five installments basically in the same, you could argue Nightmare 2 definitely went out on its own thing for sure.
But it still feels tonally more consistent, at least.
Totally more consistent overall, compared to this one, especially. That's one series. Now you have this like outlier, and then that's supposed to be your final. Like, it doesn't
help that New Nightmare comes after, so it makes it feel even more out of place, because New Nightmare is arguably the closest to the original, and then the third in a lot of ways. So you have this movie that is harkening back to things that people love while doing its own thing, and it lands much better because of it.
And yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think Freddy's Dead, unfortunately, it decides it's going to end the series because 5 was the tired point. At the end of the day, it ends up being more tired in a weird kind of way.
Yeah.
I would argue, and I'll say last thing before we start maybe rating the film, is coming up with our final numbers, is I honestly think some of the highs of Freddy's Dead are better than like 5, for example. But unfortunately, it's just so off kilter with itself that like it's not as consistently good or bad as like the other films, to be completely honest.
It just kind of is.
Just kind of there.
So with that, because we turn everything up to 11 here if we're going to do the ratings.
That's true.
It's weird because I like watching it.
Yeah.
I have more fun with it than I probably should.
Yeah.
I think England's great in it. I think that it's got one of the great kills in the franchise. I think that there's some good ideas in it. I think it's a little messy. I think it's missing things. I like the past. I'm going with a 6. Like, just like straight kind of down the middle. Nothing like amazing, nothing bad. Like, it's just, it's a fastball down the middle. I have fun with it, and I'm good with that.
That's a solid tone, because I'm looking at our first. Okay, obviously we both gave the first one an 11 out of 11. Perfect movies. We both gave Nightmare 2 6. We
Yeah.
both gave number 3 another perfect 11. I gave part 4 an 8. You gave it a 7.5. We reversed that in 5. You gave 5 an 8, and I gave it a 7.5. And I'm looking at this now. You're giving this one a 6, and it's funny to me that you gave it the same as Nightmare 2, because Nightmare 2 is what I'm kind of focusing on. I'm like, where do I put that compared to Nightmare 2? Which one did I like more? Which one did I like less? And I kind of feel like I don't know. I think I might like Nightmare 2 just a smidge more. I think I'm going to drop this. And it's a hard thing for me to say. I think I'm going to give it a 5.5.
Yeah, I think that's fair though, and that's kind of where I went. Like,
Yeah.
right? Very
Yeah.
similarly. I kind of went the same way. Like, but I put it on the same level as 2 ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely it's a film I could watch. I'd rather watch this on its own than watch it
Yes.
in the series than watch this. It's a disappointing finale, but it's kind of like a cool, fun watch on its own.
Yes, 100%.
So
Sorry, Lego. I know you really like this movie, and if you feel bad because we didn't like it as much as you do, I apologize.
I think she'll understand completely. She knows that people like she doesn't have the same love
Yeah,
as everyone else
I
does
just,
for sure. So I'll say I think it's a solid
this is a
choice.
fun movie though. Ultimately, I know it sounded like we were harder on it than we probably were, but like it's really not a bad movie.
And I
It's
want
just
to point out again, I mentioned this last week when we were bringing up to it. This is the only film so far in any of the big 3 franchises that was directed by a woman,
mhm.
a female director, and she is definitely not at fault for this. I do love a lot of things that she chose to do. I think
I
she was
also
still
think it's
learning.
great she was able to do it in the end
Yes,
because
absolutely.
like
She
she
deserved it.
had been involved in the franchise for so long. I think that's really awesome.
She was owed this, I think, from how she's doing it. And I don't know if it was because I'm hoping it's that fact that they thought she earned it as well.
Yeah,
Part of me wonders if it wasn't like, Robert Shea was known for being a little bit of a skinflint. Is like, well, I can hire somebody within and they'll
yeah.
cost me less money budget wise potentially. But either way, I'm glad no matter what it was, I'm glad because she did deserve a shot
She
at this
totally
moment.
did.
And she has gone on to do some great work. Like Tank Girl, like I said, Doctor Who, she has a lot of great work, and she's still to this day doing Doctor Who stuff. And she's done other great shows and television. She did episodes of like Quantum Leap. She did episodes
Yeah.
in the new Quantum Leap, by the way. One I actually enjoyed, American Gods, Superman and Lois. She did Sherlock,
She's super
Flash.
involved, man. She's done so
Yeah,
much stuff. She's awesome. I love her.
yeah. One of my son's favorite Doctor Who episode was Twice Upon a Time, and it's one she wrote.
Yeah,
And
I love that.
it's a great one. It's a great one for sure.
It's a great
So
one for sure.
yeah, so good for her. And I'm glad to see it started here in good old Nightmare on Elm Street saga. And yeah, so that's going to do it then for us as far as this episode goes. Next time, we're getting into a movie which I know is one of our favorites of the saga, both of us. And I
New
wouldn't be
Nightmare, baby.
surprised. I would be surprised if it rivals and goes up there with 1 and 3 because Wes
Yeah.
Craven's New Nightmare was definitively brilliant. It was definitely a great way to tackle the return of Freddy in a way. It was definitely new, unique, interesting, and
And
they
it
do
paves
a
the way for
wonderful job.
Scream.
It really does. It paves the way for Scream, and it also paves the way partially for other. I think you could. After talking with Lego about this, you brought up something that I didn't really consider, and so I want to give her credit where credit's due. It was a part of a 90s like deconstruction of franchises. Last
Yeah.
Action Hero, for
Yep.
example, something like that, like deconstructing the action genre that way. West Craven's New Nightmare does a little bit of that with this. You might do it in a different kind of style, but it is like
But it
in that
definitely
way.
does.
The idea is let's deconstruct what we know about these franchises and present them in a different kind of fashion. And
Yeah.
so West Craven's New Nightmare is definitely right in the part of that. And Demolition Man, another kind of thing that did that to a degree. Yeah, a lot of the big stuff like that. So I like this idea. I
I
can't
love
wait
that.
to talk about it.
That's a great point. I can't wait to talk about it, and that'll be in 2 weeks, kids. 2
Weeks.
weeks.
We're there in 2 weeks, so we'll be there. PJ, where can the folks find you?
You guys can find me right here doing the thing with this gentleman here. You can find me on all the social media platforms at PJ_Campbell, doing the thing, usually Blue Sky. I'm trying to get away from using Threads as much, but I'm also still on Instagram, so you can find me there.
Perfect. Find me all over the Blue Sky. I love the Blue Sky. That's where I
Me
am. You
too.
can find
Blue
me,
Sky is wonderful.
so I am there all the time. You can find me all over this channel, of course, as Matty Gunner always says. My name is on the tin. That's where you can find me. I do every other week. I try to do every other week here with 2 Mediocre Wait to Use on Film with PJ. 2 weeks with Lego. Every other week, I should say, with Lego, doing V, our franchise watch through of that, including the or to actually tackle the Big Finish released VUK Visitation audio project that was just released. It is really good. You should listen to that as well. Of course, every week, like I said, Star Wars podcast with Maddie Gunner, Holy Snokes every week there. And my Queen podcast is generally every week as well. And now, like PJ just said, for the Patreon, we're going to start doing MCU, two Mediocre White Dudes on the MCU. So join us for that for sure. And if you can't help out with Patreon, I get that completely. But you can like, you can subscribe, you can share, you can comment, help us fight that evil algorithm. And yeah, so we will see you next time on Two Mediocre White Dudes on Film. And until then, peace.